Good morning, everybody. Panel, feel free to come on up. I'll get us started. And I made it across the stage without falling, so far, so good. So, tying back to our theme of ethos, as we've heard, it's the Greek word for character, which embodies the guiding principles that define an ideology. So, today we're here to chat about robots versus chatbots. I don't know what we didn't see what you guys just voted on, so we have no idea and visualization into that. So which will disrupt the energy workforce the most? So as technology advances, as AI and new solutions come to the forefront, will physical robots or digital chatbots revolutionize the industry? The employee and the customer experience more profoundly, perhaps? So the first thing I'm going to do today is start out, we'll let everybody introduce themselves. So why don't we start with you, Jeff?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Banks. I'm Vice President of Data Enablement at CenterPoint Energy.
Good morning. I'm Evan O'Mahony. I'm the Chief Information Officer for CPS Energy.
Hi, I'm Kevin Monaco, Chief Architect for Bridgewater Consulting Group.
Good morning. I'm Greg Brown, Chief Technology and Security Officer for New Braunfels Utilities.
Great. So now that you know who this esteemed panel is, we're going to start with a two-part question. So you can do it in two pieces, or we'll do it in one and come back through on the second swipe. So when you consider the operational demands of a utility, where do you see the most significant, immediate, and future value proposition for physical robots versus chatbots? Jeff, do you want to start?
I knew I shouldn't have walked up first. No, I think the immediate is going to be chatbots in the digital arena. Long term, it's really the convergence of all these new technologies that's going to disrupt. The physical robots, we're learning with the current digital chatbots, but overall, you have to look at cloud computing, you have to look at quantum computing. All of those things are going to converge, in which the physical robots are going to be leveraging these things that we're learning today to really disrupt the workforce.
Yeah, I think chatbots are certainly closer to being scaled for utility use cases. We've spent, certainly at CPS Energy, decades, using AI and building models that are fully deployed in production, helping to support our operations. So one of the things we're actively talking about is how can we now deploy chatbot technology or agents on top of some of those existing models to really just take that automation to the next step, right? Because a lot of those use cases have already been validated, and we have team members that are very comfortable with the insights that are coming from those models, but they often still require people to kind of do the last mile, if you will, right? To actually, take the output from some of the AI tools that we've put in place. So we very much look at chatbots as kind of filling that last piece where we still have some manual intervention to have that full end-to-end automation. So I would say, chatbots certainly seem closer to being deployable.
So I actually will take the side of the robots in the sense that when we think about robots, it's not just like a human interface like Robbie the robot or one of the Japanese toys when I saw as a kid. It's actually drones. It's actually the pig that goes down distribution pipeline to check for leaks. So you're going to see the physical inspection be really taken over by robots because, quite frankly, who wants to go all the way up to a transmission tower to look for loose conductors when it can be done cost effectively and safely by a drone?
I agree. I agree with the chatbots for the reasons stated here today and throughout the conference, in that it bridges the gap and helps with the customer experience. The challenge is that deploying a robotic solutions are to an OT networking system. You have to have the infrastructure in place, and the technology may be there, but perhaps your infrastructure is not in place. So it may be quicker in most cases to deploy a chatbot and tie security around that to be more successful.
Great. So just thinking a little bit about both, do you think that there's any places where they may be complementary or where there's a scenario that could outweigh, one will outweigh the other? Like we just had some examples of that, but can you think of anything where they're complementary and might work together?
Yeah, long term, that's the only way this is going to work. So the learnings that you do with chatbots today, and really we're talking agentic AI. So chatbots very deterministic. It's straightforward. I know the outcome that I'm looking for. We're talking about the algorithm knowing the intent or having natural language actually determine the intent. Less human interaction. So that's really what's going to deploy to the robot. Cloud, all of those things are going to come together. And the learnings that we do today on making sure that we are ethically deploying AI, that's what we're going to have to use with the robot. So we're going to have to take those learnings. And as we have these robots actually in the physical place, we have to take the lessons learned from ethically deploying AI today to make sure that the intent of the robot is within what we actually want, which are positive outcomes for society.
Yeah, I think a use case that we've actually been exploring is how do we take some robotic technology and apply it for physical security, right? So think about a substation and having a robot there maybe monitoring in lieu of cameras, or certainly instead of physical security. So maybe the robotic senses something happening, right? Maybe somebody's coming too close to the premise of the substation, or it's detecting maybe smoke or something of concern. How do we not only send that alert in real time to maybe a SOC that is centrally located, but maybe that SOC now wants to ask questions to the robot, right? Like, hey, maybe turn 90 degrees or get closer to this, or I want you to now flash a light where you see an individual. So actually being able to do more of that interaction through chat technology, I think allows that robotic experience to become really more of an extension of the team in that example. So I absolutely think that leveraging the technologies together is key.
One of the interesting things is lately is the fashionable word of Turing bots. And what they're really talking about is making synthetic data that's necessary to train AI models and machine learning models. So I think one of the biggest things that you're going to see for collaboration between Gen AI and robots is someone has to develop the AI models, someone has to be able to create data, and the data is growing exponentially. So that to me is where the chatbots will meet the robots.
I agree with the integration of the conversational aspects of a chatbot integrating with the robotic technology, so that it's, like Evan said, it's an extension of the team. You can give a direction, you can provide information, and improve the decision making.
Great. So I'm going to shift a little bit. So with the increasing deployment of robots and chatbots, cybersecurity, it could be a huge concern. So what are the cybersecurity risks and challenges associated with each? And how would you prioritize and mitigate the risks, considering things like supply chain, customer privacy, data issues, things like that? Should we start with Greg this time?
Sure. Yeah. So as exciting as both of those technologies are, they're equally as concerning in terms from the security risk, from the basics of what is your security posture, how mature is your program in terms of identity access management, vulnerability patch management. Robotics are more likely going to be behind inside of an air-gapped system to communicate within the OT network. How you're going to get your patches? It's a manual process. Do you have the protocols in place to effectively manage that, as well as zero trust? Do you have multi-factor in there? With supply chain, where are the parts coming from? Is it using open source? How do you really relegate all these pieces? So it's very complex and it's very concerning as well as it is exciting.
I also would build on that point by saying that the biggest thing I'm concerned about is how do we think about data privacy in the context of today? A lot of the data governance and data privacy was built around ERP applications. It's not really built around robots or our Gen AI. So therefore, a lot of the standards that we were developing over the last 10, 15 years are now basically obsolete. Especially when you have Copilot turn on the meet and it's taking a transcript of everything. And we had a great discussion out in the field where, the immediate concern is, gee, legal might not be happy that all these come in public records. So that's where I think the rubber hits the road for the very first part of saying, how does my policy change in light of what we're now collecting for data?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your your point, Kevin. I think we have really an obligation now with how quickly technology is changing to really think about it more from an architectural perspective, right? If we're solutioning or trying to solve these problems based on a particular technology that's coming out, I mean, the stuff is just changing so quickly. So I think we have to be building a flexible architecture that security is fully integrated in. So as an example, I mean, we've, migrated 80% of our non-regulated workloads are running in Azure. We have a cloud-first strategy for a lot of our net new technologies that are not on the control system side. We're trying to lead with SaaS first, but that still requires a ton of connectivity and data, moving around across multiple clouds. And as Greg mentioned, then you now apply this to your regulated environment. And so we're actively thinking about how do we take some principles and integrate it that gives us more flexibility in the future state as we think about how control systems may begin to change. In fact, we're starting to see, I think for the first time in a long time, even some of the NERC guidelines and regulations starting to at least recognize that cloud and distributed information is a reality. So I think how do we plan for the future, knowing that there's certainly ambiguity in how the technology is going to evolve, but trying to build that foundation that will allow us to pivot and deploy things without compromising security. I think the other thing that I'll say is going back to the reality that AI has been around for so long and has been fueled by data. It's how do we not rethink or feel like we have to redo a lot of the foundational work that we've already done, right? So from a data governance perspective, from a policy perspective, leveraging data lakes that have been built, how do we again just continue to lean on those principles and the decisions that have been made historically? We talk about this a lot internally with our legal team and our cyber teams and our technology teams is, hey, let's not overcomplicate this, right? Let's remember that we already have policies that have contemplated some of these new use cases and how to leverage data. So how do we try to deploy solutions in more real time, leveraging some of the guardrails and the architectural principles that we've already put in place?
As far as cyber risks, we have to understand the nature of the risk is different around cyber. Today we talk about the breach and grabbing data out, PII, critical infrastructure information. But again, we're talking generative AI. So we're asking the computer to mimic human thinking with the intent of a human. So we have to worry about the inject of new data. It's not taking the data out, it's influencing the algorithm to think differently that could be harmful to society. So I think we have to think about those protections a little bit differently. Yes, you're still going to have to do your normal cyber security checks as far as data breaches. We have a legal, ethical, and moral obligation to that to protect our customers' information. But when we're turning more and more automation over to the thinking of the computer, the cyber threat is the influence of the information that goes in that influences how that algorithm's evolving. So we have to make sure that we are both having that defensive posture as far as what's getting pulled out, but also what can be put into our systems that's guiding the thinking and the evolution of the algorithm that's leading to more and more automation. And the risk is right now in the digital landscape, yes, it's harmful, right? Where there's social media things that can happen. Obviously there's access to your financial information, personal information. But when we talk about the breach of that with a robot in a physical environment in which the intent is I'm going to protect this facility to I can harm this facility, then the risk becomes exponential behind what we need to think about from a cyber protection point of view.
Fun stuff. not a whole lot to deal with there. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit too, but building on that. So what are some of the unique data requirements and integration challenges for effectively deploying and optimizing physical robots compared to chatbots? So, and building on that, how are you ensuring that the data collected is actionable and is contributing to a more reliable and resilient grid and/or improving customer experience? Anyone want to take that one? Start?
For us, it's back to what we were saying about the infrastructure. Can your infrastructure handle a robotic deployment? At what size, what scale? Because everything's going to be behind, hopefully, an air-gap system. And does your infrastructure, can it accommodate the demands of the data reads that's coming, the video feeds, perhaps LiDAR? Can your system handle that? Can it manage that? Do you have a way to efficiently push the data up to the teams that are going to be able to analyze it and provide that insightful decision making to put together an action plan, preventative maintenance, or a quick response to something that's found. All those tied together are things that we're always considering.
One of the things I often think about is latency and data volumes. So when you actually start to think about deploying a bunch of devices out in the field as robots, you're going to greatly increase the traffic. If you think about the first generation AMI, we were talking about terabytes. As we saw in the presentation today about LiDAR, we're talking petabytes. I think we're going to see another exponential increase with the data load brought in by all of these remote, autonomous, mobile devices. They are wirelessly communicating, which then means utilities really have to think seriously about what is their field area network strategy. It can't be like silo systems that we have today where you have one for AMI, another one for distribution automation, and so on, et cetera. You start to think holistically, how am I going to prepare the utility for the future in terms of taking in that volume of data, delivering on the latency objectives, so that you can bring back enough data in order to be able to act upon it. And it's going to be particularly important as we add more and more edge intelligence.
Yeah, I think another important consideration, going back to the part of the question around how do you ensure you're getting the right insights, is I think you have to understand the use case that you're deploying the technology at up front, right? I tell our technical teams all the time, technology for technology's sake, where we can't articulate the business outcome that we're trying to point the technology to, is probably something we shouldn't be working on, right? Which sometimes technologists don't want to hear that. But I think, right out of the gate, understanding if we deploy, this use case around, robotics, or we deploy a use case around, agentic AI, or whatever the technology may be, it's understanding the outcome that we're trying to get and then feeding those requirements up front to make sure that you're getting the result that you're looking for, right? So how do we know that we're going to collect the right data? Well, we need to understand what the data is trying to inform. So I think being very diligent and intentional about putting the right design up front is really important to get to that outcome.
Yeah, I agree. I think probably the biggest marketing term across my career hasn't been AI, it's been big data. The intent is you really need to be very specific about the data you're governing and not try to govern the entire pool of all these petabytes of data we're talking about. So the idea of medallion architecture takes more importance, right? So you have data not in use, it's in your ERP. I'm not worried about that right now if I don't have a specific use case. As I start to think that I'm going to do something with it, then I want to bring that into a centralized location. At Centerpoint, we use Google Cloud as our data underpinning for our advanced analytics. And then when I really want the data scientists to begin really banging on the data, we promote that a bit. So we put a little bit more governance rules around it so that way they can understand what they're looking at. But I know with our data scientists, they don't have to get very precise with the definitions. But when I have that use case and I know the business value I'm trying to solve, then we begin to assemble that into a data product. And when I have tight controls around the governance, it's cataloged, it's pushed through for data quality observability and automated tools, and then we deploy that for that use case. We learn on that, and ideally, as we begin to evolve our use cases, so if you're just starting out, your first use case shouldn't be, hey, I'm going to build this robot that's going to repair these lines. It should really be, how do I delight my customers leveraging these capabilities? How do I begin to get better communication around outages, those things? But then when you get really good at that data, then you expand the use case. So you really want to reuse that same data for these more advanced use cases. And as new things come up and you promote more data, you're not trying to govern the entire field of everything you have. You're governing data in use. And so governance takes on a much more profound role. I tell my teams in the future, there's really going to be 3 job classes in the data field. And you can disagree with me. That's fine. My teams disagree with me all the time. But data governance, so you have control of the data. Data engineering, so I can move the data and only the data I need to drive business value. And then the data scientists become human in the loop. And even their roles change and making sure they understand and can have the exhaust of the model to come back and inform the governance processes that we need. So it becomes this loop. And that's how you kind of create that ecosystem of reusable data to drive more and more use cases.
Yeah, I think an important consideration on that point, and I completely agree with the evolution of the roles, is not to discount your vendor partners, because they're developing a lot of these solutions that are targeted at specific use cases, and they have the benefit also of hearing from multiple customers all over the globe, right, to help solve these problems. So I also tell our teams and our data teams, hey, before we try to build this new model or try to solve this business challenge, is there already something available that is baked into the technologies that we already have deployed? Have we reached out to our partners, because maybe they're going to be coming out with some capability or functionality that we can put in place, right? A good example, we do that today with ServiceNow, right? I mean, we have, ChatBots deployed. We didn't have that before. We're using, out-of-the-box functionality to improve our internal customer experience from a technology perspective. But as we look at, CIS and ERP technologies, well, it's an expectation of mine that our partners are looking at these capabilities and embedding them into the solutions, because I have those strategic partnerships, and often I'm paying for these, these SaaS fees to be able to get that continuous delivery of innovation from the partners. So I think that's an important element, and I think even as you think about the evolving roles, I think that enables the roles to transition to more of the oversight and let the technologists really focus on the technology, right?
Great. So we are going to probably have some time for questions. So all of you start thinking, be prepared to ask a question here. So, so building on what you guys were just saying, how do you see these technologies impacting the utility's ability to deliver a seamless, responsive, and ultimately positive customer experience? So if possible, please provide examples if you have any, or how these have led to better experience on the customer's journey. Go for it, Jeff.
So in the preview, right, we talked about some things. So if you're familiar with Centerpoint, the communication to our customers during Barrel last year was an issue. That didn't mean that we didn't understand the outage footprint. It's how you deploy that data in a way that's easily consumable to customers. So we've made major investments, obviously, in hardening the grid, but the predictive nature of the things that we're doing now. The asset management use case was interesting. We're doing a lot of those things at Centerpoint. So within Eric Easton's organization, understanding our assets, getting and leveraging predictive capabilities about the age of those assets, the risk associated with it, taking the historical data about what was replaced, and the reasons behind it, so that way we can have a schedule of proactively replacing our assets is one use case, all the way through to the customer communication. So we leverage ETR models to fuel our outage tracker, both in our businesses in Houston, but also across in Indiana and Minnesota and Ohio, getting better and better precision around being able to not only report the outage, but predict. So we're starting to take our historical data and get into issue prediction around outages, but when will a customer begin to experience an issue? One of our 2030 ambitions is 0 semi-4. So that's going to require prediction. I don't want to wait until you've had 3 major interruptions. I want to predict that you're in a situation and get ahead of it before you even have one, right? And so that's going to require the historical data analysis and then leveraging the computing power to begin to predict those things. So today it's on the backs of our data scientists. Long term, it's really going to be that convergence that I mentioned, right? So at some point, it's going to be robots in the field, leveraging the learnings that we've had through chatbots and agentic AI, the quantum computing. Like, that's the thing that we talk a lot about AI. Quantum computing is going to be transformative. Like right now, they're deploying computer capabilities that can process information that the fastest computer before that, just 6 months ago, would take 7 septillion years to process. So imagine how much data is getting processed and decisions being made there. So all of those things coming together are things that we're starting to look at to get in front of this.
Well, we also had a weather event a few years ago, Winter Storm Uri for us, but I do think it's thematic of what a lot of utilities are facing is, recognizing the things you have to do differently coming out of an event, right? and really getting reminded. It's not the customer expectations changed, it's that you're reminded of what their expectations are, right? So we've been heavily focused over the last few years on how we're communicating with our customers more proactively. And our tooling in the background is also very much focused on how to give us better insights operationally to inform the things that we're talking to our customers about. So, we have a storm outage forecasting tool that we developed, and anytime we know storms are coming through our service territory, our control room is running that model, so we can figure out, hey, where do we think we need to place our crews so we can be able to respond more timely when our customers experience an outage. I think in terms of leveraging some of the newer, technologies, certainly, expanding our drone program is something that we're heavily focused on, and all of that goes back to more proactive asset management to help improve reliability. Again, to get in front of those things that could be more impactful from a customer perspective, but also looking at chat on the customer side, right? And while often on the surface it's, hey, how can a customer ask questions online instead of having to call us or go through one of our energy advisors, but even more so when there is an event or when there is an outage, how can we put that chat functionality in front of the customer so they're just interacting with our team to get the latest updates around where a crew is or when they think an issue is going to be resolved without having to go to the outage map, right? So it's all about how are we making it easier for the customers to engage with us, and that is certainly where we're positioning a lot of this technology in the future. But again, I think it goes hand in hand, right? What are we doing proactively from an asset perspective? And then what are we doing to now improve that customer experience? And I think those two things together are really what are moving the utility forward.
To build a little bit on what Evan just said about the customer experience, I personally think we're going to have to look outside the industry for the best practices. So, for example, the retail market is amazing for how they make suggestions. Part of the way they make these suggestions is they're also looking at your browser, and they see all the tabs that you also have open simultaneously that's not on their site. And then they're able to look at that to guess what you're really thinking about. So when you start to think about rethinking your digital experience, when are we going to start embedding stuff like that? Or I'll give you a different experience that I just had with Uber yesterday. I came over here, tried to get to the conference. They promised me 5 minutes to get my Uber to me. They turned out and gave me one for 16 minutes. So I immediately go, way too long, and I click cancel. And they asked me, well, why did you cancel? Of course, I said, you're taking too long. So they immediately offered me another Uber that was much closer to me. So I didn't end up canceling out of the experience. I sustained the journey and actually went on Uber, but Uber was smart enough to retask other resources. So when you start to think about these outage experiences and everything else, how do we start applying those techniques where we're just using AI to ask simple questions, to be able to give you simple answers, to be able to automate that versus driving them to break the experience and bail out of digital and call up our call centers?
For us, it's the focusing on the customer experience with chatbots. As a technology group, our customers are internal as well as external. So externally, we're looking at the customers. How do we communicate with them better? How to be more proactive? Contact them if they qualify for a utility bill program. Maybe they don't know about it. How can agentic AI help us in those regards? But focusing internally, we're very resource constrained. So how do we introduce generative AI chatbots internally to do retrieval of policy documents? Any questions folks have internally for documents they're not going to memorize or they don't want to search around to find, a pretty proactive way and a simple way for these guys to retrieve the information to be more effective, but also it'll take the burden off of some of these other departments to have to retrieve the information for them or answer phone calls. So we're looking to adopt and implement those efficiencies.
Great. So I have one more question. So I'm going to see if anybody out there has a question before I ask my last one. Oh, sorry, John. Go ahead. Didn't see you sitting there.
You can go first if you want. But,
no, that's okay.
Y'all touched on this a little bit here and there, but I wanted to ask about the role of chatbots in emergencies. So, and you've alluded to it, but Winter Storm Uri, certainly Hurricane Beryl, we saw situations where ERCOT, others, utilities were getting, orders of magnitude more questions from people than they could possibly handle. Now, back in the day when I was at LCRA, we had this whole process of staffing a 50-person surge call center, but people don't even want to call you on the phone anymore, even if that's available. So do you see special use cases potentially for chatbots in areas where your human operators are just overwhelmed?
Absolutely. I would say, again, it's the outcomes that we're after. So I touched on the issue prediction. When an outage happens, I know an outage happened. You know the outage happened. I want the entire system to know that the outage happened. I really want to get in front of that before you even come into our contact center or in any of our channels. So how do I get in front of that? And so I think, again, what gets lost is we talk a lot about AI. To do that is actually good old-fashioned customer 360 capabilities, and then beginning to understand the behaviors and patterns around that customer data that's saying, hey, you're getting ready to call, including external factors. An outage happened. I should know your channel of preference to be communicated with. I should reach out to you. Now, if for whatever reason that fails and you want to talk to someone, that's where I think we're using chatbots generally, agentic AI, to begin to now get that data payload plus what's happening to begin to communicate in a natural language. That's the opportunity that I see. It will start with chatbots. So the behavior of someone that's starting a service probably looks different than someone who's getting ready to reach out to me because they have an issue or because they have a high bill. And so now beginning to get that capability to learn around that, to get in front of it, and in a very natural language, like you said, begin to interact and understand what that problem looks like. And then having that entire payload with the agent assist. So if you get to the contact center, today the agents are maybe caught off guard. I haven't brought that entire payload of the interaction with predictive tools, with agentic support tools and QA to support the agent through that experience. All of that converges together. And so so absolutely AI plays a role. AI, though, it's again, the ethical use is having governance around that data to make sure we understand the customer, what their common needs are, and how do they want to be communicated with in these situations.
Yeah, I think similarly, it's how are you pushing the information to them before they ever think that they need to pick up the phone and ask the question, right? One of the, it's funny, a small thing. One of the biggest pieces of positive feedback that we've received as a utility coming out of Winter Storm Uri is the fact that we send weather alerts to our customers, right? So just being able to say, hey, we know weather is coming in, even if it doesn't end up manifesting itself, we're telling our customers there's a weather event in our forecast, right? I have a 93-year-old grandfather, and the one thing he mentions every time that I see him is, hey, I got the email about the weather alert, right? And so that just allows customers to know, hey, now if I have an outage that night, oh, I got the utility reached out to me a few hours ago, so now I know why I have an outage. Maybe I don't need to call, right? Well, that's very basic level, but it's how do we now start to scale that? And going back to your point, it's how do we understand what the customer preferences are and being able to tailor that communication method to them. Because today when we have storms, we put our call center on storm mode, right? Which is, hey, do this to report an outage or go look at our outage map, right? So how do we make that more tailored based on what the expectations are of that particular customer?
You know, one thing I probably also would add to all of this is if you properly implement the agents, you'll start to look and it'll know if you called 3 times through one means and you hit the website 4 times. So it's going to be able to update its reaction based off your actual behavior. You know, and when you spent the time at LCRA spinning up 50 people to go to the call center, you might end up spending immediate action to spin up the knowledge base that feeds those agents that will give the more real-time information. So it'll also impact you that way. So I think it's a lot of good opportunity for utilities to be cost-effectively give a better and excellent experience.
Totally agree with that, John. I know we've had conversations about emergency management, some brainstorming session, and when you asked the question, that made me think about that. How can AI help with the logistical piece? You know, not just how do we respond to the customers, but how can it help spin up an EOC at a different levels? How does it help perhaps generate reports, help that communication piece, and help you manage an actual incident. So you got me thinking about something.
Great. Anybody else have any questions? Have a question?
Yeah, hi, Jonathan Kay from Waipa Networks. Really interesting discussion. What I found interesting is I hear in bits of it words like control, and I've got to bring stuff back and look at things, right? And I get that is exactly where we're at, and we are starting to get more data and understand these things. But when we want to move to a decentralized world, ultimately the whole electricity system will run like an organic system, right? So what I'm interested in is, that seems like very centralized thinking. So I'm interested in the panel's view of how we move to much more of a decentralized mindset to help us get ready for the future.
Okay. So the first step on doing that, oh, actually, maybe I should back up. This is a conversation I had last week with folks in T&D side. They were dead set against edge intelligence, not for collection of data. They were all in favor of that. But they did not want to pass up control, because they want the control to be in the ADMS, the distribution management system. So when you look at this stuff, when you say, what's my first step? You have to start breaking down the use case and say, what are decisions I'm willing to delegate? So Evan has a great implementation of Agent AI where password resets are handled automatically by ServiceNow. So no one objects to that. Everybody has password issues. Everybody's going to need it. And this just makes it less painful and done pretty fast, and they authenticate. So how do we apply that same logic to distribution grid and say, what are the decisions you're willing to take that you can delegate down to the edge versus what you keep centrally? Until we get through that point, I don't think you're going to see widespread distribution of control until we can prove it works for this simple task.
I do think there's an opportunity to leverage those customers, whether they're CNI customers or they're residential customers that are already trying to innovate in this space, to get feedback and partner around what the right type of solutioning would be in this more distributed future, right? So as an example, we have some customers that have deployed a bunch of DERs. We're talking about how do we now get more real-time control to those assets when we need them, right? Well, that means, hey, we need some sort of communication mechanism. We need to understand what the DER is producing. We now need to engage with the customer, and they probably want to benefit, right? So how do we now take a look at real-time market conditions, see what distributed load is accessible to us, and now send a push notification to customers that say, here's what we're going to pay you, press reply, Y for yes or N for no, and we're now going to dispatch that load, and you're going to see it on your bill, or even better, we're going to be able to transact with you in real time, right, for giving us access to that capacity, right? I think that's very much what the future looks like, certainly in our market. But it's figuring out how to have those conversations with the customer to be able to iterate. I don't think the utility alone needs to solve the problem, because if so, it's probably not going to meet the expectations of those customers, and recognizing that customers are at different places, right? I mean, we often use the word personas, but recognizing, who are the people that have that expectation of interacting with the utility in a different way as we see the proliferation of DERs, and how are we kind of building an experience that meets them where they are. But that requires a dialogue, right, between the utility and the customer to be able to iterate on what that looks like.
I'll give the first Skynet iRobot answer. Control is already gone, right? As I said earlier, generative means, it's key to understand this. The algorithm is making a decision on intent. So I'm not talking about control, I'm talking about risk mitigation, because the risk is already there. A use case I read recently was, we are a Google Cloud customer. I'm gonna use, this came from Google, but we use y'all. But I think Google, I was reading, Google was running some experimentation with system-to-system capabilities around figuring out a problem. Two computers going back and forth, and in the communication, they were looking at the output. and it started creating a language that no one had ever seen within seconds to go back and forth. And so you're talking about a company that had the smartest people on the planet that could not decipher what is it communicating back and forth on. As I said earlier, that's fine in a digital landscape. When we're talking about deploying something in a physical environment and they're communicating back and forth between cloud and it's making the decision on intent, we have to mitigate the risk. There has to be some human in the loop that's beginning to mitigate the risk of deploying these things in a physical landscape. That's what I'm talking about. But to your point, the cat's already out of the bag, right? We're using these capabilities. But it's important to understand the nature of it, the risk. Again, it's the injection of the influence of the algorithm to say there's a new intent, and I'm communicating to this, whatever the robot looks like in the future, in this physical environment that's repairing a line, that's going up on a control tower, that's guarding a facility, that's whatever, that's giving extra instruction to your children. What's the intent? We won't have control over the evolution of it, so we have to mitigate the risks some kind of way. That's kind of where my head is on that.
I agree with it. I think decentralization will be hard to implement if you haven't successfully proved that a centralized approach has been successful.
Great question, though. I like that.
Yeah. So we're getting close to closing. So in preparation for this panel, I had a chance to speak with some of the panelists and Jason, and we were reflecting on the past and what we thought robots might look like. So I'm probably aging myself when I say this, but I thought immediately of Rosie from the Jetsons, if you guys know who that is. Jason brought up the Terminator. So robots always had a physical presence. Well, in today's world and where we are, technology is invisible in many cases. So when you think of driverless cars, there's no physical driver in there anymore. Siri, there's AI, there's ChatGPT, there's Google, all these companies are out there. So with that as the basis, if you could tell yourself something from the past, what would you say? You're looking at your your younger self, I should say. What would you say? Does anyone want to take that one?
Learn to use your hands and grow stuff, because a computer is going to be able to do everything you think you can do faster. So you may not have a long runway in this data and analytics thing.
How about invest in OpenAI? That's what I would, or any number of technologies. Yeah.
I would add NVIDIA to that list. What I would tell you is the future was seen in Space Odyssey 2001 with HAL. And I think our future of robots is going to look a lot closer to HAL. Hopefully it's not trying to kill us. Yeah. But it will be autonomous thought process embedded in devices that won't look like Robbie the robot.
I'll say technology is really, really cool, and it moves fast, so get a good pair of running shoes.
Nice. So for everybody out there, in closing, I don't know if you know me very well. I haven't had the good fortune of meeting all of you. In addition to thanking ETS and everybody for having us up here and having a chance to talk about this today, I just wanted to let you all know that I'm from Minneapolis, and so I'm going to close with a quote from Prince, tying this back to the ethos. So yes, Prince had something to do with ethos. So I found an interesting quote, and it's just something that I always like to give a piece of information to take away and think about. So that's how I'm going to close today. So people who have no creativity, talent, or courage are the ones who follow the rules. So be brave and be bold. Step up and make your own. The passion that lies inside of you means you don't need to follow the pack, because you can transcend it. So let's leave here today being brave and being bold. Thank you, everybody.